Good morning. I'm so happy to welcome you all here today for our program, The Black Index, Artists in Conversation. I'm Mary Miller, Director of the GRI, the Getty Research Institute. Here in Southern California, it's 11 a.m., where I am in my kitchen in Los Angeles on traditional Tongva and Cabrioleño lands. You, our audience today, are in many locations on other continents, other countries, in many time zones in Europe and the UK, down under or down the block from me. We live in this pandemic more in the world than ever. We seek to live in this world with awareness of where we are, who we are, and the power of the visual to bring understanding of the past into our present and future. The Getty launched the African American Art History Initiative in 2018 to establish a major center for the study of Black art history here on the West Coast. In just this short time, we've developed partnerships and programs, especially for archives and related original sources, led by a curator of our special collections, whom you will meet shortly. You may have heard about the swift archival growth. The GRI is one of the 5 institutions that acquired over 4 million photographs and images of the Johnson Publishing Company, better known, of course, as the publisher of Ebony and Jet. And just a few months ago, the GRI, with the School of Architecture of nearby University of Southern California, acquired the archive of the most significant Black American architect of the 20th century, Paul Revere Williams. There's more to say, especially in the growth of library resources here on the West Coast at the Getty. We have annual research fellowships in the initiative, and with a residency we so hope to return to in fall of 21, as well as a program to conduct oral histories of notable Black artists, scholars, critics, collectors, and art dealers. At every step of the way, we have benefited from the advice of senior scholars and the new partnerships they've fostered, which leads us to today. We are so pleased to collaborate with Bridget R Cooks, who joins us from the University of California, Irvine, where she holds a dual faculty appointment in the program of African American Studies and the Department of Art History. Professor Cooks' work addresses Black visual culture, museum criticism, film, feminist theory, and post-colonial theory. Her most recent book, Exhibiting Blackness, won the inaugural James A. Porter and David C. Driscoll Book Award in African American art history, and she has received acclaim for her curatorial insights. You'll see why today. Bridget, I now turn this program over to you.
Thank you so much, Mary, for the work that you're doing and for your enthusiasm for this event today. And welcome to everyone who's part of our program, the the Black Index Artists in Conversation. As Mary said, I'm Bridget Cooks. I'm Associate Professor of African American Studies and Art History at the University of California, Irvine. And I'm thrilled to be with you today for this event I've been looking forward to for so long. It's presented on the occasion of the exhibition titled The Black Index that opened virtually at UC Irvine yesterday. So the Black Index is a project that I've been working on as a curator for a few years, alongside the exhibition manager, Sarah Watson, who's chief curator of the art galleries at Hunter College in New York. I'd like to thank the artists in the exhibition. I'd like to thank the artist, professor, and director of the University Art Galleries at UCI, Kevin Appel, the curator of the Contemporary Art Center Gallery, Allison Unzicker, and preparators of the exhibition, Andrew McNeely and Tariq Garrett, for their support. I'd also like to thank the collaborative funders of this program, the UC Humanities Research Institute, or UCHRI, and the Getty Research Institute's African American Art History Initiative with special thanks to Mary Miller, to Rebecca Peabody, Kelly Jones, and LeRonn Brooks for their support. I want to say just a few things about the exhibition, which is the reason why we're together today. So the Black Index is an exhibition of work by 6 artists: Alicia Henry, Lava Thomas, Kenyatta A.C. Hinkle, Dennis Delgado, Titus Kaffar, and Whitfield Lovell. Through their work, these artists build upon the tradition of Black self-representation as an antidote to colonialist images. The exhibition frames their art as a creative index, an alternative to the barrage of photographs of Black people who have been arrested, incarcerated, and who have died, often through violent means. Through a variety of innovative approaches, each of the artists addressed the paradox of being Black in America, to be alive, but to have little social value. The artist's works focus on the resilience and beauty of Black people, despite living in dire political and social conditions. Please find more information about the exhibition and its programs at the exhibition website, which is theblackindex.art. Our format today allows us to enjoy conversations between 2 artists in the exhibition, Lava Thomas and Whitfield Lovell. They are paired in conversations with 2 scholar curators, Leigh Raiford and LeRonn Brooks. Each conversation will be followed by a discussion period prompted by questions from you in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So make sure when you're asking questions of the speakers that you're not putting it in chat, which is disabled, but Q&A is available to you. The conversation will be followed by a 5-minute break, and then we'll have the second conversation. And this event is being recorded and will be made available shortly on the Getty Research Institute's YouTube channel. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first 2 presenters to you. First, the artist, Lava Thomas. Lava Thomas tackles issues of race, gender, representation, and memorialization through a multidisciplinary practice. She draws from her family's Southern roots, current and historical sociopolitical events, intersectional feminism, and African-American protest and devotional traditions for her art practice. Central to her work are ideas that amplify visibility, healing, and empowerment in the face of erasure, trauma, and oppression. Thomas's art has been featured in numerous group exhibitions, including the Outwin 2019 American Portraiture Today at the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C., Plumline, Charles White and the Contemporary at the California African American Museum in Los Angeles in 2019, and the True Stories Project, Exploitation and Empowerment at the Patan Museum in Kathmandu, Nepal in 2017. In addition, her work is in several permanent collections, including the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the Studio Museum in Harlem, and the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in Philadelphia. Thomas is represented by Rena Bransten Gallery in San Francisco. It's also my pleasure to introduce the scholar Leigh Raiford. Raiford is Associate Professor of African American Studies at the University of California, Berkeley, where she teaches and researches about race, gender, justice, and visuality. She serves as affiliate faculty in the program in American Studies and the Department of Gender and Women's Studies. Rayford received her PhD from Yale University's joint program in African American Studies and American Studies in 2003. Before arriving at UC Berkeley in 2004, she was the Woodrow Wilson Postdoctoral Fellow at Duke University's John Hope Franklin Center for Interdisciplinary and International Studies. Rayford is the recipient of several fellowships and awards, including, and I'm not mentioning them all here, the American Council of Learned Societies, the Ford Foundation, and I'll mention this latest one, which was just announced yesterday, along with her colleague Tiana Paschel, She is the recipient of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation's Just Futures grant to address racial inequality through new humanities-based research and solutions. Among her many stellar and influential publications in the popular and academic press, Rayford is the author of the acclaimed book, Imprisoned in a Luminous Glare, Photography and the African-American Freedom Struggle, published in 2011 by University of North Carolina Press. Please join me in welcoming Lava Thomas and Leigh Raiford.
Thank you, Bridget, for inviting me to be in this program and the exhibition. I'm thrilled. And thank everyone from the Grady Research Institute and all of you who are here today. 3 portraits from my project, Mugshot Portraits, Women of the Montgomery Bus Boycott, are included in the Black Index exhibition. The project illuminates the under-acknowledged legacy of Black women's activism through a series of portraits based on mugshots of women who were arrested during the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955 and 56, the pivotal event that launched Dr. Martin Luther King's leadership of the civil rights movement. Next. The popular narrative of the Montgomery bus boycott is well known. Rosa Parks' arrest for refusing to give up her seat to a white passenger on a segregated Montgomery bus, the ensuing year-long boycott led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the NAACP lawsuit, which resulted in the Supreme Court ruling that deemed segregation on Montgomery buses unconstitutional. Next. That narrative honors Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose life and work we reflect on today, but largely omits the Black women who initiated and organized the boycott. Next. This project aims to expand that narrative by centering the activist labor of Black women. I'm looking at this period through firsthand accounts of the women who organized the boycott and text on gender and the civil rights movement, Black feminism, and histories of women's activism. Next. Rosa Parks was not simply a seamstress too tired to give up her seat to a white passenger. Parks was a longtime secretary and investigator for the NAACP, investigating cases of racial and sexual terrorism against Black women for over a decade. Next. Joanne Robinson initiated the boycott, an English professor at Alabama State College and president of the Women's Political Council. Robinson and the WPC organized a one-day boycott after Rosa Parks' arrest, arranging for the distribution of over 50,000 handbills, urging Black Montgomery residents not to. Ministers of Black Montgomery's churches embraced and extended the action and elected a young Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. president of the Montgomery Improvement Association. Women were the initiators, organizers, chief strategists, along with the thousands of domestic workers who refused to ride the bus, financially crippling not only the bus company, but businesses in downtown Montgomery who lost millions of dollars of revenue. Mintha L. Johnson. Next. The backlash was swift, with KKK bombings and state-sanctioned violence and intimidation. An Alabama grand jury handed down over 80 indictments to boycott leaders for breaking Alabama's boycott laws. When leaders learned that mass arrests were imminent, they dressed in their best and turned themselves in. Next. Acting within the repressive limits of the mugshot, a photograph designed to remove traces of the sitter's humanity, the women took control of their representation with their self-possession, their style, and their refusal to hang the booking numbers around their necks. Cora McCaney. Next. They seized the moment of surrender and made it their own, choosing when and how they would be photographed as part of the criminal record. Jimmy L. Lowe. Next. Transforming codes of criminality into representations of resistance, the portraits commemorate the women's service and sacrifice. Lottie Green Barner. Next. Ida Mae Caldwell. Next. Uretta F. Adair. Next. With the exception of Parks, Robinson, and a few others, we know little more than the names of these women. Addie J. Hamiter. Next. I chose drawing as a medium for its accessibility. We have all used pencil on paper. Audrey Bell Langford, next. The materiality is a metaphor for the fragility of this history, the ease with which it can be erased if it isn't preserved. As drawings, the portraits have to be protected and treated with care, framed and kept out of direct sunlight to prevent yellowing and fading. Next. Conceptually, the notion of labor is embedded in each drawing with the accumulation of thousands of lines and strokes. The drawings are built in layers in a process that is laborious and time-consuming. The line is labor. Next. Last May, Angela Davis drew a direct line from the boycott women's activism to the labor of current Black activist women. As the work of Stacey Abrams, Helen Butler, Felicia Davis, and so many others whose voter mobilization efforts flipped Georgia in both the presidential and Senate races attest, Black women's political agency continues to be a powerful catalyst for change, a potent reminder that all of us have the power to shape the course of history. The recent siege of the US Capitol by white-wing extremists also reminds us that a collective, sustained, organized, and disciplined response to radical white nationalist terrorism is ever urgent and necessary. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lava, for the overview you provided to the work. And I just, first, I just want to thank you, Bridget, for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I'm a great admirer of your work always, and I'm always delighted to be in conversation with Lava and her really incredible artwork. One of the things I so appreciate that you really started with the history of the movement and the kinds of silences in the archive or in our historiographical understanding of the role of Black women's labor and activism. And one of the things I think that's fascinating is that your own PowerPoint tells the story largely through photographs, right? Mm-hmm. And yet there are so few photographs in the record, or actually, well, photographs of Black women. And so I'm curious, but what you have done in this series is not merely a work of kind of, faithful copying, right, of the photographs. Right. And so I'm wondering if you can say a little bit more about, not just about the process or the choice of materials, but what are the kinds of the forms of translation that these works take? And I don't know that people, sort of seeing on their, their laptops or whatever, are able to really appreciate the size of the images, the kinds of, the things that I always appreciate, the glint in folks in in your sitters' eyes. But if you could talk a little bit about how you have kind of exceeded the photographs, the original photographs themselves.
Sure. The actual mugshots are quite tiny, and because they're so old, they are not very clear. Many of them are out of focus. Many of them have these flash points that make it so that you can't really read the photograph directly. But the way that I wanted to approach this project was as if these women were sitters for me. So the portraits are slightly larger than life size, and they're hung at eye level so that the viewer will have a one-to-one intimate engagement with them. I also, when thinking about how to approach drawing them, I came upon a method of this just visible strokes, the accumulation of visible strokes that are very evident when you're standing in front of the drawing to speak to this idea of labor and sustained labor and the passage of time, so that when one is looking at it, you have this sense that this is work that unfolded over a long period in the same way that the Montgomery bus boycott actually unfolded over a period of 13 months. I wanted to make these women as beautiful as I could, while also being faithful to the way that they looked. But this idea of beauty and the way that they really took control of their representation was really important to me. But there are elements in terms of like the eyes, the way that the light is reflected in the eyes, so that you are drawn to their eyes in a kind of mutual recognition.
And you've also, paid similar attention to hands, to clothing. And I also think that you do, it's not just the eyes. I mean, some of your sitters are, fully giving us side eye. Like they are, you have really highlighted the modes of resistance and refusal. So can you talk about how you amplify those?
Okay.
Those encounters?
When I was drawing these portraits, I spent so much time with the women. It was almost as if I could read their personalities by spending so much time with this very small mugshot. What was interesting to me was the range of emotions, like the various expressions of interiority. Some of the women were visibly defiant. You mentioned the side eye. That was Mrs. Uretta F. Adair. That smirk, that side eye was so telling. As a Black woman, you see that with your relatives. It's a very sort of common expression. There's also expressions of resignation, a feeling of what I interpreted sometimes as a feeling of shame from having been arrested for the first time. These were not criminal women. These were women who were fighting against violence, intimidation, and segregation.
Before, I know we're going to turn to Q&A shortly, but before we get there, I think this is you have really gone to the heart of the kind of photographic colonialist state project, right? By using mugshots in particular, right? And so, instead of using Bridget's language around the exhibition, right? The Black Index, as an artist, you're challenging viewers' desire for classification. And it just, you mentioned a little bit why the mugshot, but can you talk about both the process of choosing and what were the, did you ever have kind of reservations or hesitance around using this particular very charged archive that is very much about, denying humanity, that is not about meant for people to spend that much time. It's about erasing personality and reducing people to types.
Right. My main goal with this project was to transform those representations whose goal was to deny their humanity, to give these women the fullness of their humanity with a method that was almost devotional in my approach to drawing them. I didn't have reservations, partially because the mugshot, there's this juxtaposition of these very well-dressed women appearing as paragons of respectability who are holding booking numbers. It's very jarring. So my goal was to transform these representations of criminality into commemorative portraits.
what was maybe the most surprising aspect of this process for you?
The most surprising was really once I started digging into my research, learning the history that isn't part of the popular history of the civil rights movement. To really understand that these women were, their actions, their acts of resistance, were responsible for launching Martin Luther King's career as the leader of the civil rights movement, and yet we don't know very much about who they are. There's very little biographical information available for them.
So I'm trying to hold space for audience Q&A. And so if there's not a question from the audience, I'm going to ask another question. Go ahead and ask Lava another question. Photography has plays a role in a lot of your drawings, and I'm sort of, we can use the work that's behind you right now as an example, and would love for you to talk just a little bit, beyond the mugshot, what role photography has played for you in your work, what you see as as the limits and the possibilities in your practice.
The drawings that you see behind me are drawings of my ancestors, and this project comes with a long story that I don't have time to really go into, but I will say that a decade after my grandmother's death, I was looking for sheet music in her piano bench, and I discovered her photo album, which I'd never seen when she was alive, which was quite surprising. And that home is still a part of our family. It's our family home. So the album itself was so old and crumbling. And when I opened it up and looked at these women who had a very prominent place within the album, but there was no notation to know who they are, I just knew they were ancestors. Their gaze were so striking that I was compelled to begin a series of work based on family archival photography. So archival photography is very interesting to me. It's a very potent source for portraits. I have created portraits with sitters, and that's a very different experience. But the experience of using archival photography, especially when creating women, and so far, my body of work only has Black women in it. There's this idea of a conversation through time that contemporary photography or working with a sitter doesn't provide, that is really interesting to me.
Great. So there are a couple of questions, and one of the questions that did come up was just, since you're talking about archives, the question is how you obtain the mugshots, are they in a public archive? But I think, maybe I want to tweak that a little bit and ask, how you chose them. Why these mugshots as opposed to the sort of broad range?
Sure. I started looking at the civil rights movement. I'll just back up a little bit. I started looking at the civil rights movement at that period of American history, shortly after the 2016 presidential inauguration. And I was looking at the rise of radical right-wing domestic terrorism and violence. I was looking at the rise of misogynistic language. I was also looking at the ascent of white nationalism in the White House. And I was looking at the methodical erosion of hard-won civil rights laws and protections. So digging into the civil rights movement, looking at that part of history, and then looking at the mugshots and looking at the foundational events of the civil rights movement and looking at the events that actually sparked Martin Luther King's leadership of that movement, I discovered these mugshots. And so to me, what better way to convey someone's, a woman's both service and sacrifice to the movement than to transform a mugshot into a portrait.
Beautiful. So I'm going to ask, I think we have time for one or two more questions. Sam says, I was struck by Lava's discussion of materiality and line work in the drawings and how she understands their meaning and purpose. I'd love to hear more. So you can talk a little bit more about the question, the line work and the materiality. And I just actually want to add that I had the opportunity to see these works in progress, both at your studio in Berkeley and when you were a resident at the Headlands. And I just was really struck by, just how the interrelationship between you, where you had to place your body, obviously, right, to make that line work, the standing, the kind of, just your labor, your physical labor in doing, in executing these works. And so I just, and that has stayed with me. I always see that. I can't unsee that when I see you very much reflected in these drawings.
When I was thinking about material and when I was thinking about, medium and material, right? I wanted to choose something that would speak to an idea of labor. So the way that I went about drawing them, I created a lot of work for myself. I could have easily used perhaps charcoal and a lot of shading tools to make this process go faster, but I wanted to honor the activist labor of these women and really respect the time that went into desegregating Montgomery buses, which happened over a sustained and long period of time. So this way of working, the accumulation of, and it's not just the accumulation of lines, I first lay down a graphite drawing, which I can make adjustments to, and then I go over that with Conti pencil, and I have in my studio probably 10 pencil sharpeners so that I can, so that that line is sharp, so that the point is sharp, so that the viewer can see the amount of labor and work that goes into it. And that way I'm acknowledging and respecting and honoring the labor of these women. So I was very intentional about those kinds of choices and the fact that this isn't part of the popular history, and you can erase pencil on paper. So these drawings require a certain level of protection in the way that this history requires our remembrance.
I think Bridget was going to jump into our conversation.
Okay. Thanks, Leigh, and thanks, Lava. And I'm just going to go through some of the other questions that have popped up in the time we have left. I'm going to skip down to the one that I think follows what we're talking about here in terms of your technique. So someone is saying, at a closer look at the portraits, the lines that create the face remind me of anatomy illustrations of human muscles. I saw this as a correlation with your efforts to humanize these women and give credit to their work. Is that something you aim to do with your technique?
You know, I looked at a lot of anatomical illustrations just to learn anatomy. And those illustrations are so fine and so detailed that I think that I internalized that process. And early on, I did a project of hair drawings. I don't know if you're familiar with that work, but that work was very precise and detailed as well. So some of this is not consciously thought out. It's a way, although the line work in this particular project was very intentional, but I'm a detail oriented artist. That's just the way that I work.
Okay, thank you. And we're getting more and more questions, which is incredible. And of course, everyone just wants to know when and how can we see these drawings in person. One question here is, well, thank you for your talk and for sharing your beautiful work with us. Did you make any small changes or additions to the portraits? That is, did you add elements to your drawings that weren't present in the photographs? And if you did, could you speak about the significance of those changes or additions?
I try to be as true to the mugshot as I could visually read the mugshot. In areas where I made some changes, it was because the visual information wasn't available to me, because the mugshot had a spot on it, or it was torn, or it was out of focus. What I tried to do is make everything in this laser focus. And for example, in some of the portraits, you can't really see the jewelry very well. So I had to make up those elements. But by and large, I tried to stay true while also amplifying the visuality of the work, because the mugshots were not very clear in most cases.
Okay.
That's so fascinating the way thinking about, I have always thought of what you've amplified, which also reminds me, when you're talking about the jewelry, it's very reminiscent of James Van Der Zee, right? Sort of like removing elements of bad health, or, actually etching jewelry onto sitters. To kind of to get to kind of a truer portrait in a certain kind of way. But I hadn't necessarily thought about what you'd eliminated of the state, and in this question, and eliminating the sort of out of focusness, right, or the tornness, is also really fascinating, and a kind of speaking back to, again, or just sort of concretizing all of the ways that that state vision chooses not to see Black life and Black humanity.
Right. You know, it's interesting because when I first began this project, I considered including all of the visual imperfections of the mugshots, but I didn't want to reproduce a stain. I didn't want to reproduce a tear. I wanted to represent these women in and not just the fullness of their humanity, but in the fullness of their beauty. And I wanted to honor their choices for the way that they wanted to be represented. They dressed. You know, these women appear as if they're going to a club, a women's club meeting, a women's luncheon, or going to church. I really wanted to honor the fact that they were representing themselves as the beautiful, fashionable, stylish women that they were, and using that in the service of fighting injustice and segregation and racist violence. That was just fascinating to me. So that was something that I wanted to amplify.
That's great.
Another comment from the audience. Thank you for your time. Great presentation. How many drawings are in the series? And do you consider each an individual drawing, or is the series a singular work consisting of several drawings?
The project, it's a singular project that consists of several portraits. When I exhibited the work in 2018, there were 12, and now that has grown to 14. And I'm hoping that there will be more mugshots from this particular period that I uncover. So as of now, there are 14 in the series.
Okay. I will answer this question. This is about how people can see the work. So, with the pandemic closures, yes, we're limited. The exhibition of this work will continue this April. It will open at the Palo Alto Art Center. And hopefully by the spring we'll be in a different situation so that people can make appointments to see the work, or maybe the Art Center will be open. In the fall, it's going to go to the art galleries at Black Studies at UT Austin. And then in a year from now, next January, it will open at the Leubsdorf Gallery at Hunter. And then after that, we are working on a solo exhibition of Lava Thomas's entire series with an additional work at the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts, which is really going to be a homecoming where members of the community, members of the families of the women will be able to come and see the work all together. And we're really excited about that. So I'm going to be guest curator for that show. And I couldn't be more delighted. Another question, we have 2 more minutes, so let's see. You speak of spending time with the people in order to create the portraits. This speaks both to labor, historical time, as well as time as in time incarcerated.
Right.
Also time as what memory can capture. Can you speak more about your own understanding of time, as I imagine you work across multiple timelines? That's a great, I think that will have to be our last question.
Okay. When I am working, time, it feels as if time stops, because I go into a meditative zone where I don't become aware of time until my hands begin hurting, or until I'm hungry, or so that's I would say my physical experience of time when I'm working on any project. Actually, it's very similar, but especially when I'm drawing. When I'm drawing, that is that's the activity that stops time for me. My relationship to time, especially historical time and memory, I always do a fair amount of research. I always have a reading list for my projects. So I'm dipping back into time by reading all of this information. And with this project in particular, I read firsthand accounts by women who organized the boycott. So in that way, I'm sort of reliving that time through their telling of it. So that's another way that I experience a sort of different relationship with time through the reading of history.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Lava, and thank you so much, Leigh. There are a lot of questions, and they're great questions, and we're out of time. What we can do, though, is try to respond to questions via email for people that have sent in their questions, so that at least you can get your answers. I want to thank both of you, and I also want to acknowledge that this is the beginning of the Martin Luther King Jr. weekend. And I picked this date as an opportunity to help us think about time and how much things have changed and how much they've stayed the same, how much work there is to be done, but how much really fantastic work artists like Lava and Whitfield are doing. And I really just want to acknowledge that. And the time that you're giving to us now instead of being in the studio. You know, artist time is very valuable. So I appreciate you spending time speaking with us.
Oh, this is my pleasure. Thank you so much, Bridget. I'm so excited to be a part of the project. And Leigh, I always love being in conversation with you. Thank you.
Such a joy. Such a joy.
So we are going to take a 5-minute break. There will be a countdown slide so people can keep their eye on it and come back. Stretch, get some water, what have you, and then we'll come back with our next artist conversation. Thanks so much, everybody. Welcome back, everybody. I think there's so much more to say, and I'm really excited about the conversation that we've had. And I'm really delighted to introduce our next two presenters. The second part of the event is a conversation between artist Whitfield Lovell and scholar curator LeRonn Brooks. Whitfield Lovell is internationally renowned for his installations that incorporate masterful Conte crayon portraits of African Americans from between the Emancipation Proclamation and the Civil Rights Movement. Using vintage photography as his source, Lovell often pairs his subjects with found objects, evoking personal memories, ancestral connections, and the collective American past. In 2007, Lovell was awarded the MacArthur Foundation Fellowship, often referred to as the Genius Grant for his art. His works are featured in nearly every major museum in the United States, including the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, Yale University Gallery, the Brooklyn Museum, the Studio Museum in Harlem, and the Seattle Art Museum. Lovell is represented by D. Seymour Gallery in New York. LeRonn P. Brooks is the Associate Curator for Modern and Contemporary Collections, specializing in African American collections at the Getty Research Institute. He is a specialist in African American art, poetics, performance, and Africana studies. Prior to working at the Getty, he was an assistant professor of Africana Studies at Lehman College and a curator for the Racial Imaginary Institute, founded by the esteemed poet and cultural theorist Claudia Rankine. His interviews, essays, and poetry have appeared in publications for Bomb Magazine, the Studio Museum in Harlem, Socrates Sculpture Park, the Spelman Museum of Art, Callaloo Journal, the International Review of African American Art, as well as the Aperture Foundation, among others. Please join me in welcoming Whitfield Lovell and LeRonn P. Brooks.
Hi, Bridget. Hi, Whitfield.
Hi.
Hi. I just want to say to start off, thank you, Bridget, for all your work on this project, and thank you, Whitfield, for speaking with me today. And I want to begin with a general question for you, Whitfield. When and why, because this is a very unique body of work in your career, when and why did you begin this work?
Well, that's a good question. I started doing the card series back in 2004, and each card series consists of 54 drawings with attached playing cards. And I actually enjoyed doing the first series so much that I I felt, well, you know, when I get to the last card in the deck, then I'll move on, because that will be a complete statement. And I started feeling kind of sad at the end of the deck, because I enjoyed doing them so much. So I began doing another series with round playing cards, which is the one that I think there's a slide of it that we'll see later on. It's one with which is at the African American Museum. These are the round cards. That was my excuse to do another card series, because I really enjoyed doing the the drawings and pairing the cards together with the images. It's something that it's just doing a series of these a card series can take me up to like 5 years because I do them a little at a time. And I try to give each one as much love and attention as it deserves. So after doing the rounds series, I said, okay, that's it. And eventually I got I took a little advice from my friend Camille Billups, who's always telling me, Whitfield, you just do whatever you want to do. Don't hold back from doing something for, some, set reason. So I said, okay, I'll do one last card series. And so that's what we're looking at the Irvine Gallery. It's these cards are rectangular cards. And the thing, and with the first card series that I did was with rectangular cards, and they all sort of dissipated as soon as I did them. I wanted to keep them together and see what kind of, what would happen with them all together. But people started buying them, and I hardly ever got a chance to see more than 4 or 5 at a time. So I fought hard to keep these two series together. It's hard to turn down a sale, but I felt that it is important to that there's strength in numbers. So this is my current. This is one of my current card pieces. I have so far 26 of them done, and there are 24 of those are on view at the Irvine. Now, the photographs that I use for, can we go back to the photographs that I took of the card players? Because I just wanted to say that my father was a self-taught photographer, and one of the things that I grew up doing, aside from being his model, I mean, he photographed the family all the time, but I also helped him out in his darkroom from the time I was 5. And so my earliest memories of looking at images were of, like the images coming to life in the photo solution. And we also spent, as a family, a lot of time sitting together and looking through photographs and telling stories about them. And I spent a lot of time with my grandmother looking through her 15 albums of her relatives. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother was from South Carolina, and she had many, many pictures of people from way back in the 1800s. And I learned stories of of all of these people, and I learned about who my people were, where I came from. So it seemed very likely that I would start shooting. So when I was at Cooper Union studying painting, I started photographing. And so I wanted to start off by showing these 2 images of a card game. Let's see the next one. This is a card game that I photographed. Cards were played every 2 weeks at my godparents' house. there was a card party, and everyone dressed up and came, and they played like seriously. There was a table for the kids. We started out with dirty hearts and spades, but by the time you were like in your teens, you got to sit with the grown-ups and play
Right.
bid list. So I stopped taking photographs myself, and I decided to study painting. But it it makes perfect sense that photography would play a large part in what I make as an artist. And I also abandoned oil on canvas to work with charcoal and dry materials because I was working from photographs. And I worked from my dad's photographs for a good 10, 15 years. And then I started working from images of people I didn't know at all. So for the most part, over the last 20 years, I've been working with images of so-called anonymous people from found photographs that I've purchased from flea markets or auctions and so on. I have a collection of about 2,000 photos of people I don't know.
You know what gets me, Whitfield, when you said 15 photo albums, when you said your grandmother had 15 photo albums, I mean, that's documentation, that's an archive. And a lot of us learn to appreciate and know what a photograph was through our grandmother's photo album, and us learning who this cousin is and so, that history of documentation, I don't necessarily say it's unique to Black families, but it's very important to Black families, that kind of tracing back, right? And what gets me is that you use these found images, but then there's this whole sociality around the game itself in these photographs, which is beautiful, holding the cards to chest, like you're not going to, you're not going to see my cards and that kind of thing. It's a whole social world in which you can sort of find yourself, right? Like you said, from the child's table, then maybe you get to the big table. But if you mess up on the big table, right, Whitfield is back to the child's table, right? So what gets me,
you had to know your stuff if you were going to be at the grown-up table.
Most definitely. And so, in some ways, the cards themselves, so the found images, right, with this deep history, your own history of the card game and what it means to family, that there's a sort of intersection between the two. Yeah, could you speak about that, how the cards are the intersection between, I mean, first and foremost, these photographs are amazing. They're amazing. Just to see the glass of wine on the table, right? And then you have others. It's a way of sort of coming together. And so the cards themselves, I mean, in some way represent this bigger picture of coming together,
Yeah, a real cultural thing. And, I often in talking about my card series, I tell people that card playing is a major social event in the African American culture, but I think sometimes people can't quite visualize that if they haven't lived it. So therefore, I wanted to show these images as just a taste of how engrossing it was, and how serious. You see my aunt there in the dark glasses, she never cracked a smile. She was serious about her cards, and she watched the board, which means you watch every card that's being played. And so having this as part of my cultural background, it feels like, I mean, I use I do a lot of images of people and I pair them up with physical objects. But it seems that using the playing cards was so meaningful because for me, the cards have meaning. If you can literally read into the meanings behind the cards. And so when you juxtapose the image of, like, say, a club with the image of a young woman who's very smartly dressed. I mean, clubs are clubs and spades, I think, are like war defense type, have those kind of like connotations of violence and aggression, but also self-defense. And so when I see this image of the girl, I think of the clubs as that's her strength, and that's her, those four clubs on the plane of the card represent her inner fight.
So in some way, the image and the design, right, the graphic design of the card go hand in hand. You know, I was going to ask what's more important, what's more appealing to you, the graphic nature of the cards or the images or of the people themselves, but they're together, one communicating to the other. What first attracted you, the cards themselves? Yes, please.
When I was a kid and, you know, the grown-ups were playing cards, I had a deck. I remember this vividly. I couldn't have been more than 4 or 5. I remember looking at each card and thinking about specifically the face cards, the jacks, the queens, and the kings, and turning them around and seeing a sort of like mirrored image of that that character, and looking at the designs and the numbers. And the visual part of me was always very fascinated with the beauty of the card. And that was, quite frankly, something that only I could see, because if I tried to share that with my family, they think I was cuckoo, you know. Mm-hmm. But the diamonds, like thinking about what do diamonds represent, what do hearts represent, and spades. And in terms of the card pieces, I do not see them as separate. I can't see them as separate, because when you put two elements together in this way, it makes a third element that has these various components. So one part of it that I enjoy doing is, of course, I love making the drawings. I love going to all of that like detail and really feeling the person whose image I'm drawing. I like to try to capture not necessarily their exact image or their exact likeness, but I want to capture an emotional quality in each of them, so that there's a human quality, like there's a soul that you can touch and you can feel. And then for me, the most important, or not important, but the most exciting part is when I find the right card to go with that face. And sometimes I can go through 10, 15 cards and not find the right one. In a piece like this one, where you have the 3 diamonds. They're stacked up.
Mhm.
It can be it's a very sort of static, formally, it's a static sort of an image having the three stacked. And then, when you have, what do you call, an ace, you have this one dot in the center. And so how do you make that work with an image without it taking away from the image, but also without the image taking away from the card? But what happens is that when they come together and they click, it's like I hear it click. It's like
Mhm.
it's like that, and it feels right. Did that
You know
answer
what,
your
Phil?
question?
Yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. You know what, Phil? One of the
Okay.
things that my parents migrated from Alabama to New York, right? One of the things that they both took with them
Mhm.
independently were cards. And I'm thinking of the Venus of Willendorf here, just in terms of the portability of the object, right? And so, some of your work deals with migration. How do cards, the idea of cards, is something that's
Mhm.
portable, fit into that greater idea of migration?
Okay. Um, Interesting question. I think it's got a lot to do with something I learned about the slave days, which was that um, when the slaves were not allowed um, to learn to read, they were taught to count, because a lot of times they had to take the cotton or the tobacco or whatever it was to the market and sell it and barter. And so knowing how to count was part of one of the things that the slaves were able to do. And they had many games that were related to counting. Also some games which I forget. There's a game that's from West Africa, which has to do with putting stones into little dishes and counting the stones. And so social games that incorporated numbers and that kind of sharpness were very important. And I think that probably is one of the reasons that the cards are so. The cards have been held on to so much, and it goes across so many cultures. My father's family is from the West Indies, Barbados, and his side of the family also was very, very much into cards. And so I would say probably if they had to grab something because their house was on fire, they grabbed their cards and their photo albums. Those were the things that meant something to them. And sometimes we didn't know what to do if we didn't have any cards.
Whitfield, that builds on the idea of life as a game for Black people, just in terms of winning and losing, just in terms of at every turn, there are choices, right? There are choices that we have to make. You win with aces, you lose with, lower, and so there's another layer of just,
Trumps.
Yeah.
You win with trumps. I'm sorry.
It's complicated.
Joke.
It's complicated, but yes.
Yeah, but also sort of implicit here is the fact that in a way, life deals you a certain set of cards that you have to work with the hand you're dealt, you know? And so I think that that sort of thing comes into it. Like when I look at the images of these people, I'm never ceased to be fascinated by the expressions and the features and the hairstyles and the just the ways of expressing themselves in these found photographs. But also, I do know that life is not always something that you can manipulate and make exactly what you want. So I think that that is somehow inherent in the way that the cards, the individual card pieces work.
Absolutely. I think we're going to begin Q&A soon.
Okay. Well, let's see if I have any more images to look at.
Yes, you do. I'm gonna go through them.
Okay. I just wanted to see what else there was. This is I try within the series to have a balance of men and women, as well as a range of ages from younger adults or teenagers to elderly people. Let's see what is there more? Oh, and this is actually an image of my mother. I for about 20 years, I worked from images of people that I didn't know. And I did that on purpose because I after working from my father's photographs, I wanted to sort of free myself up. I felt that I was too tied to specific narratives of the lives of the people that I knew in my dad's photographs. And so I began to see the images that I found, the old studio portraits and mugshots that I was working from, as like stand-ins for the ancestors that I don't know or never will know. And so this is after 20 years. This image of my mom is the first one that I've done of someone in the family.
Mm-hmm.
Or someone that I know.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Whitfield. Appreciate that. It's really touching.
Thank you so much, LeRonn and Whitfield. We have questions, and I wanted to start too by saying something about when I encountered your work, the rounds that's been collected at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And I was so taken aback by the presence of all of these beautifully detailed, lovingly created African American people. The way that you had paired them with cards, the work just had sound to me. And I was so moved by an artist, in my mind, making a community of Black people. And I wanted to ask you, if you feel that you're creating, when you create a set, if you're creating a community of people, if you're imagining one person speaking to the other in a card game, or if they're all individual and have, you know, discrete relationships with the cards that you match them with.
Yes, yes, and yes.
Thank you.
No, I really am fascinated with the fact that most of these people I'm depicting would not ordinarily be seen in a museum. You know, you don't see Black faces in art very often. And there's something about working from these images and searching for the humanity. So we're not just talking about an ephemeral black and white piece of paper. We're looking at a soul, someone who was breathing and living and loving and eating and sleeping just like we are now. And one day, many years from now, I assume that people will be looking at images of us and, you know, contemplating some of us. So, I mean, I, I kind of feel like it's not um, like it was not a planned mission, but it was a very logical mission for me to get into that.
Mhm.
Because sitting there for hours looking at my grandmother's images of her parents and my great grandfather feeding the hogs in the hog pen was like, you know, really? How did she die? And oh, when, you know, and so you learn about these people's lives who have been gone long before your time. And I realize how many people there are who uh, you know, this photograph might be the last image of them
Mhm.
on the planet,
Mhm.
you know, the last evidence of them having walked the earth.
Mhm.
And so it's not only an honor, but it's like it's a big responsibility to uh, honor these people and to search for their humanity and to try and bring that forth.
Mhm. Um, I want to also
As
ask
I said,
questions. Go ahead.
yeah.
Okay. Some
As I said, I
questions.
think of these people as, yeah, okay. I was just saying that I think of these people as my relatives, even though they're not necessarily related to me.
Okay.
They're all, you know, we're all related in some sense. So,
Okay. Thanks, Whitfield. I want to ask a couple of questions from the Q&A from the audience. So Sam says, I am so struck by and appreciative of this work. I'm an avid spades player, so cards mean a lot to me. What do you think about the jokers in the deck? Also, the relationship between the standard deck and tarot cards.
oh, okay. Interesting. I was I always use the if the deck has two jokers, I will use them. And each deck has at least one joker. And I'm usually very thoughtful or, you know, considering how to make that, like the ace of spade and the joker, meaningful. For example, in the Rounds series that you saw at the African American Museum, the Joker was, no, it wasn't the Joker. It was the Ace of Spade.
Mhm.
Had an image of a little black boy eating watermelon, and I was like, no, 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 no. You know, I couldn't just could not let that go. And so I paired that together with an image of a very handsome, distinguished looking young man with a graduation cap, you see. So it's almost like juxtaposing two things that are disparate, and then you end up with a statement that is more to the point, and a more important statement than just letting it go. So I don't ignore any of the connotations that the cards have. I've done some fun things with jokers as well. And what was the other part of the question?
The other part, this person loves spades and also wants to know if you work with other kinds of decks like tarot cards.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I view the card series and the way that I'm talking about the relationships between the people and the images as like a tarot, because the card can be a signifier of that person's lot in life, you know? Just as with a tarot card, you flip it over and that's your destiny.
Okay.
So to me, they're all interrelated.
Okay.
You know, Bridget, can I follow up?
Yes.
With so Whitfield, when you mentioned the image of your mother, it brought back to me a sort of a reference to Toni Morrison and The Site of Memory. I believe it's in the introduction. She talks about the ways in which when there are no more records of Black lives, the imagination in some particular way has to fill that gap, right? Of remembering. And when you brought up your mother and the cards and all the people that you bring back, or you help us to remember in some way in your work, it just struck me that the imagination is that bridge, and your cards sort of represent that. Yeah. May not be a question, but
and I work with a lot of found objects in my work. Anyone who's seen my installations will know that. And you know, the objects that I collect and use in my artworks all have meaning. And sometimes it bothers me that these objects are just viewed as objects, you know, daily stuff. But somehow if I take a pan, which has a beautiful patina on it, and I put it like not upside, but, you know, next to someone's head, it can make the daily ritual of cooking, preparing food, surviving, you know, all of the things that we all have in common. It can give it new meaning, and it can start conversations, and it can bring deeper consciousness, as well as as well as I've forgotten what I was going to say, but the material culture of these objects lose their magic when the person who has the memory of it is gone. You see, that's where I was going with that. Because I have, like, you know, we were talking about archives and my grandmother's 15 albums. I mean, one day no one's going to know who any of those people are. But because I know, because I was taught, and I have pots and pans, and I have crochet that my grandmother made, and those things are special. But when I'm not there to witness the specialness of my grandmother's making it, that imagination is, it's not there. You see? So it's like it's about the imagination, and it's also about memory, and about listening to the stories.
Whitfield, we have so many questions. They're all interesting. I'm going to pick one as our final question before we wrap up. And this
Okay.
brings us back to the title of the show a bit, the Black Index. So here's a comment and a question. Thank you so much for your work and your conversation. I wonder whether you could comment on the indexical traces on the cards themselves, the fingerprints, the smudges, as a measure of time and a figure for the people who held them. How does that come into your process?
Okay, my my choice of which deck to use will often be influenced by the feel of them having been handled and used. And so they could have been handled and used by someone in my family lineage, for all I know. It could have been handled by someone related to you or someone, but it's the use of everyday objects in daily rituals, mundane rituals, as well as very potent, significant rituals that fascinates me. And so, yes, I'm very much attracted to the smudges of the card, the smudges on the cards that indicate the use. Sometimes some of those cards are ripped, and sometimes the markings on the cards are scratched. But I go with it. And there's another thing that I was going to say was that this card deck that I'm using has no numbers on it. Indices, they are you have to read, or you have to count the numbers of clubs on the card. It doesn't say 8 and then show you 8 cards, and I just love that. Just it's one of the things that make it for me.
Whitfield and LeRonn, thank you so much. You know how meaningful it is to me to have both of you involved. Whitfield, it's always an honor to hear from the artists, and you have so much depth and meaning in everything you say. Your work is just incredible, and I just thank you both very much for being a part of this. We are also over time, so I need to say goodbye. I'm sorry to see this day go. Please visit the exhibition website for more information, more images. There's also gallery installation images so that you can see the work on view. There's also, by the end of the month, there's going to be a virtual reality feature so that you can click your way through. Neither of those are anything like seeing the work in person, but the exhibition will be traveling. Information about the tour is on the website, and I hope that I see you at another installation of the show. Stay safe. Thank you so much for attending, and take care.